Donald Trump is a disruptor, so he goes over to Europe or he sees people and said, oh, we're getting ripped off, and NATO, they don't make their 2%, or we're going to buy Greenland. That's all to create the chaotic.
But many American small business owners say they are concerned that these tariffs are going to hurt them. What's your message to them?
They're going to be so much richer than they are right now.
In the shifting landscape of American politics, few figures have stirred the pot as vigorously as Donald Trump. Love him or hate him, his disruptive energy has redefined the Republican Party and forced a reckoning on both sides of the aisle. Yet, as Victor Davis Hanson articulates in his recent commentary, Trump's bombastic style requires a follow-up force to secure the ground he's conquered. Enter Marco Rubio and J.D. Vance, two well-spoken, disciplined lieutenants who serve as the infantry to Trump's chaotic vanguard.
The president's made clear, the president on 2 occasions in the past week has reminded everybody that the U.S. has these options available to it, but he doesn't want to do that right now because he's in the hopes of attracting people, both sides, to a process where we can negotiate peace.
I really believe that we have a great deal in common with Europe. And I'm not, yes, the Europeans annoy me sometimes, and yes, I disagree with them on certain issues, but we have to remember that is the cradle of Western civilization. The entire idea of Christian civilization that led to the founding of the United States of America.
Their role isn't just to clean up the mess, it's to consolidate, refine, and extend what Trump has set in motion. But as we'll see, their efforts also intersect with broader cultural battles.
And then they bring in the infantry, and that is Marco Rubio, Waltz, and J.D. Vance. And they say, let me explain what he's doing. Let me give you the details. And then J.D. comes in and he talks. Marco Rubio and J.D. Vance are very well spoken. And they're kind of the infantry, and they consolidate what Donald Trump did, and they develop it. Talking about, to the Europeans, this is in your interest. If you can relieve us from some of our military responsibilities, at least on the tactical level, then we can redeploy in Asia, which is in your benefit, because you are at the mercy of China as well as we are. And it's kind of like what Obama, he kept saying we're going to have an Asian pivot. All of that was rhetorical. That just meant we're going to cut the defense budget and draw down in Europe, and then when we're going to talk about going to Asia, we never will.
That's where Rubio and Vance come in. They're not the ones tossing grenades. They're the ones explaining why the explosion was necessary. Rubio, with his senatorial polish, and Vance, with his outsider-turned-insider grit, translate Trump's instincts into policy and diplomacy. They're the ones telling Europe, look, if you step up militarily, we can pivot to Asia and counter China. Everyone wins. It's a division of labor. Trump breaks the mold, and they pour the concrete. Vance's recent trip to Europe was more than a diplomatic jaunt. It was a warning shot to China's global ambitions, particularly its Belt and Road Initiative. China's been cozying up to resource-rich nations like Bolivia, snapping up lithium deposits, while locals protest their socialist government's cronyism. Vance's presence signals a Trump-aligned pushback. America's not ceding the Western Hemisphere to Beijing's checkbook diplomacy.
All these third world countries think that you invite in the Chinese, and then they build you a port or a freeway or an airport or a harbor, and then they do it for their goodwill, or they do it to create greater business. They don't. They want to be paid back. I think China sent them a bill for over $1 billion. So then the next thing they do is they infiltrate within the society itself, and they probably pay bribes off to members of the government, and then the government gives them concessions.
Rubio, meanwhile, has zeroed in on China's control of ports flanking the Panama Canal, a quieter but no less critical front in this geopolitical chess game. Together, they're fleshing out Trump's America First ethos into a coherent strategy, one that balances economic leverage with military deterrence.
And the concessions are they can profit and get their money back. So their point is they have 1.4 billion people, and they have a finite amount of resources. So they sit down with the Central Planning Commission and said, where's the beef? Where's the wheat? Where's the precious metal oil? Where's the gas? Where's uranium? And they say, these are the places in the world that they are. And then they say, you go out and build them a bridge, you go out and build them a railroad, you build them. And then when they can't pay, then you get a concession. And that's what they're doing. I don't think it's going to work because you can see it in Africa. They're not liked. The Chinese do not go in and integrate within the community. They stay in compounds. Because they're from a communist country, they're watched. They can't really freely talk and freely intermingle with the host population. So they were like the Russians of the 1970s.
Victor Davis Hanson argues that China's strategy mimics the Soviet Union's 1960s tactics, like the Cuban Missile Crisis, by using economic investments, such as Bolivia's lithium deals, to gain footholds in America's backyard. He sees China bribing socialist governments and securing ports near the Panama Canal as steps toward military leverage, exploiting U.S. distraction.
Their attitude is, well, in the South China Sea and the areas around China, you have our enemies that you're arming and helping, like Taiwan, Philippines, Japan, South Korea, Australia. So we're going to go into your territory, forget the Monroe Doctrine, and we're going to develop. It's the same strategy that the Russians used in the 60s when they tried to put nuclear missiles in Cuba under Khrushchev. And that's what they're doing. They're trying to infiltrate all of these governments and eventually get concessions, which they're doing, and then get ports, and then get control, and then bribe the governments to make them, and almost all of them are socialist governments now. And then the idea is that the next state, when they digest all that, the next stage will be they'll have military bases. And this is a way they think to pressure us in our backyard. And that's what they're doing. And these socialist governments think it's kind of neat, but then they find out that dealing with the Chinese is not like dealing with the Americans. Donald Trump was considered a neo-imperialist because he said that a larger percentage of the money we gave, and it's in dispute. He says 300 billion. Some people say 250, some say 200. Zelensky, for some reason, said he only got 100 billion or less. So there's a discrepancy. And then the question is, how much of that money were loans and how much were outright cash? And Trump has made the allegation that the Europeans had a higher percentage of loans. So he wants to recoup some money by having rare earth minerals. I don't quite understand the logic because there's going to be a lot of rare earth minerals in the American West. Places like Wyoming, Montana, the Tehachapi Desert in California, we have a lot of them. And under Trump, they will be allowed to be exploited. But the point is twofold. It's not just to get the money back that we gave Zelensky. It is to make a deterrent, because he's basically saying that if you bring Western and particularly American investment in and they build infrastructure, they have a concession, they'll pay you some money for it, and they'll pay you not as much money as you'd like because you owe them money for a while. But then that is a deterrent because it's very close to where Vladimir Putin invaded in the Donbass. It's not Western Ukraine, it's Eastern Ukraine. So the point is, if you got hundreds of American business people there, and Putin decides after he swallows his prey this time, he's going to digest it in 5 years, do it again. It's going to be a little hard because they're a de facto tripwire, and that was the point.
What ties all this together? Foreign policy, domestic reform, cultural critique is a sense of urgency. Hanson sees Trump's second term, bolstered by Rubio and Vance, as a chance to reverse decades of drift. The $36 trillion national debt, unchecked immigration, and a bloated bureaucracy riddled with fraud aren't just policy failures. They're symptoms of a civilization losing its moorings.
You look at the $6 to $7 trillion budget we have, and we're running over $1 trillion deficit, and we need to get that down because we have $36 trillion in aggregate debt. And he doesn't want to raise taxes because he feels you won't grow the economy. So he has a tripart strategy. And that's starting to obsess him, as it should, because it's unsustainable, the debt. Number one is to cut Elon Musk said there were $2 trillion. I don't think there'll be $2 trillion in cuts. We'll be lucky to get $1 trillion. But that's a lot. And then he wants to have tax cuts and deregulation and foreign investment. And that, he thinks, will get GDP up to 3%, low unemployment, low inflation, so you'll get more revenue. And we did get more revenue under his first term, but we didn't stop spending. And then third, he's coming up with all of these methods of making money. Tariffs, gold card, where instead of a green card, you pay $5 million. And there are people who, apparently there's a couple 100,000 people who have that kind of money and want to come to the United States. And so he is suggesting that if you have 200,000 and they pay $5 million, you can see you're getting up to $1 trillion. When Mr. Zelensky saved Kiev and he was riding high as the international rock star with his T-shirt and ex-comedian status, he went and negotiated 3 or 4 times, sometimes on Turkish auspices, and he could have had a deal where I think after the Russians had been humiliated, they would have gone back to where they invaded. But he didn't take it because there were people that were saying if you stop them from taking Kiev, now you can take back Crimea and the Donbass. And there were very naive people in the West egging them on and saying, you know what, the Russians are done for. I heard that Putin's going to be the Wagner Group and all these people, they're going to get rid of him. That was crazy talk. So they should have made a deal then. That's what Trump misspoke when he said that this should have never started and you started it. What he meant was you should have cut a deal right away when you had were from a position of strength and not weakness. We all know what it is. It's just a question of how far back is he going to go. He's going to keep Crimea. He's going to keep Donbass. Zelensky was willing to admit that in 2022. And then he's not going to be in NATO, but he's going to be stronger than any other NATO power. And he's going to have battle-hardened veterans. He's going to have supposedly Europeans there on the front line with American financial interest and then a backstop of the United States Air Force, I guess. So I don't think that Putin will be going in again. And maybe you'll have peace. This is the worst disaster since Stalingrad. It's about 1.4 million dead, wounded, captured.
The globe is a chaotic jumble right now, with Trump relentlessly hammering out new terms to keep his promise to America's heartland. Rubio and Vance, his sharp-witted infantry, are left to stitch this whirlwind into something solid, even as China sinks its claws into Bolivia's resources and Panama's chokeholds, and Russia stirs the pot with its unpredictable swagger. Can they steer this stormy ship through such tangled global currents? Or will the combined weight of these powers prove too much to master?